post it on the city Facebook now because it doesn't generate the link until I start live streaming it.
Got it.
Bob, you're sharing your screen with us.
Yeah, I don't know why you can't see me, but you're not missing much.
Do you have a webcam cover? There we go.
There we go. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna get going here. So, first on the agenda, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I don't know, do we have a flag somewhere that we can look at, or did we kind of move past this last time? I don't remember.
We've been moving past it, I thought.
Okay.
I could be confusing with some of my Forsyth Township stuff, but
Sure. All right. Let's just in light of the fact this is a digital meeting. So if we can have the roll call. It looks like we got Jackie, Mark, Dennis, Bob, Stephanie, Antonio, Sharon's here. Who's on 228-8604?
That's Mark Curran. For some reason, my video is not showing up on my iPad right now, so I dialed in.
Sure.
Are you hearing me via the iPad as well?
Yeah.
I just merged the phone and the iPad together, so your audio is now routed through your phone and it's connected to your video.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Then we'll just.
okay, so Commissioner Bonsall, it looks like you have everyone except Primo.
All right. Sounds good. And then do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Great. Support?
Support.
Great. All right. All those no discussion. All those in favor, please say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All opposed? Passes unanimously. So now we have our public comment period. Dennis, do we have anybody for, or I suppose, is there anybody for public comment on the phone or?
No one's on the phone.
Okay, great. So seeing no public comment, we'll move on to new business. So do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our August 11th meeting?
So moved.
Thanks. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
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 I'll abstain
opposed?
since I'm present.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mark. All opposed, all abstaining. All right, great. So that passes unanimously with one abstention from Mark. So our first real business item today is a discussion about the current housing inventory and then the condition of housing in Marquette, as well as vacancy rates. And I think that we could start. Dennis, you have some information to share with us on this item, correct?
Actually, I had just forwarded some data from Stephanie,
Okay.
and we can also, if you want, I can share my screen with that data. Stephanie, you just need to let me know what sheet you'd like me to throw up there first.
Let's look at Ad Hoc 2.
Okay. And you should be looking at it.
Got it.
So what this is this is a report from the multiple listing service for City of Marquette sales. And it tells you where we are this year versus where we were 1 year ago. We can pull these up for just about any years needed, but I think this tells you at least a 1 year to 1 year where we are. As you can see, these numbers are reflective of having not been able to sell real estate for 3 months. But even with that, they're very tight numbers.
Stephanie, looking at these sales, is this just UPAR or the realtors information? Because this does not appear to be CoStar.
No, this is just the MLS data.
Okay, so if you guys aren't aware, a lot of multifamily has really changed hands. So without CoStar in there, it's very skewed. Like the Tourville units sold for $78,000 per unit in multifamily. So you gotta
Well,
look at
we
the big-
wouldn't, wait, excuse me, we wouldn't put that in. I was pulling multifamily, not commercial.
Yep, but Tourville is multifamily, and then even like Jesse Schramm's, that sold for $108,000 a unit.
Yeah, I don't have that data.
So, okay, I just wanted to make sure people were aware because it's skewing these numbers high on the multifamily.
But I do want to make a point that there's a difference in multifamily between what we consider commercial multifamily, which is 5 units and up, and residential multifamily, which is 4 and under.
And this data would be for 4 and under then?
Yeah, I believe that's what I pulled.
Okay,
Okay, thanks for that.
Yep, I pulled 4plex and under because those are what's considered residential.
okay, do you want me to move on to the ad hoc one?
Yeah, that you can show that one. Shows you
Okay.
what our current active is and just it's a statistical look at the market right now. And then the one that I think is going to be a lot harder to view, but I thought had a ton of information for us to break down on our own is the neighborhood report. And this is something that we have access to through, it's called Realtor Property Resource. And it does, it has a lot of data in here if you have any desire to crunch it.
This is Dennis, and I was able to review this kind of quickly. One of the things that I noted on here is, and maybe you could explain it to me, Steph, but I mean, it looks like the sales have been somewhat consistent or linear over time. I mean, they've had some ups and downs, but they're generally staying in between that 150 to 225.
Correct. And that's
that's
the median sales price,
Okay,
which we like better than the average sales price.
sure. So that median is going back about 5 years or so. We've pretty much been in this same ballpark that we've been in.
So people seem to think that prices are rising very strongly, and this isn't showing that. This data pulls all data, not just MLS data, so it pulls any public data accessible to it.
I mean, it does look like a few years ago we were more consistently hovering around the $150,000 mark, and now it looks like in the last couple of years we're hovering closer to the 225. So I mean, that's a pretty big shift for people looking for a first home.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jackie. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. It'd be interesting to see the same graph like zoomed in a little bit more. It's also kind of interesting because obviously, there have been a couple of like local news articles about, oh, well, this year, the price of, I think I remember reading an article in early 2019 that in 2018, the median price of a single family home went up like 12% or something. And so, yeah, I'm kind of curious, like where these like different data sources are, where you're getting somewhat different.
I can tell you the median price in Marquette did not rise 12%.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
one of the things that, even with the median over the average, when you have 6 or 7 houses sell at 400,000, it's definitely going to skew because we don't have a lot of homes selling at 75 to balance that.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Stephanie? Any other
I do want to highlight in the section above, and there's more pages to this report, but in the section above, the percentage of own versus rent for Marquette City.
Which sheet is that on?
The neighborhood housing stats and charts.
It's just the top half.
I'm having to look up what Dennis sent. So I have your Ad Hoc 1 and Ad Hoc 2. So maybe I'm not.
Oh, no, you don't have neighborhood report, I don't think.
Okay, I got it.
And just how that compares to the county and Michigan.
That's what I highlighted, correct?
Yep.
And that we had kind of just, I think that's a really good point. And we had kind of discussed before that might be impacted by students, but regardless, it's, still interesting to note that there's a very large population of renters in the city we got to be thinking about as well.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would want, oops, sorry, go ahead.
One of the highlights of that is there isn't a lot of suburbs with rental domiciles like the large complexes of Tourville, Curran and Company. All of those are all concentrated mostly in the city of Marquette for Marquette County, which does skew that number. Whereas in some places it's spread out more.
So Steph, do you think the impact, the higher percentage of ownership in the county is because the median price is $77,000 cheaper?
That part of it, but also because the most rental units are in the city of Marquette.
Okay, thanks.
And Snowberry and assisted living and all of those, for the most part, are centered in Marquette. The one statistic, and I know Dennis and I have talked about it years ago, the one statistic I would love to see for the city of Marquette is what is our own versus rent percentage in 4 units and under, taking out the industrial commercial size rentals and taking that out. And I just wonder what we are. That's my own curiosity.
Yeah, Stephanie, I'm just curious when you said it, because I'd be interested in hearing that data as well. Kind of, okay, where is that maybe that missing middle rental? How many of those are there in Marquette? Do you have an idea of where we might be able to find that data?
What are you calling the missing middle rental?
Oh, sorry. I guess I was sort of saying missing middle is a very broad term, but I guess what I meant by that was like what Stephanie is talking about here of, rentals with, say, 4 units or less that are sort of at the scale of like a single family home.
Then why are we also, I guess, if we're truly looking at housing, is there a reason why we're not putting in the mix any of the bigger complexes?
Oh, no.
Because that's affordable housing.
Yeah, and I absolutely think they are represented in all of this. I just when it comes to sales specifically, it is a different product when it's all residential. I just, it's my own curiosity to find that number.
I think, this is Dennis, if I may, I think there might be a way to get that data. I don't know the accuracy of it, but I'm thinking in our assessing database, there are a number of properties where the tax bill gets sent to a different location. And, you know, a lot of those we know are rentals because we may deal with them on code enforcement, or they may have a rental certificate. But I think perhaps an exercise of going through the assessing database and doing a report on all properties that would have a different mailing address for the tax bill, and then cross-referencing that with the rental code enforcement data would probably give you the number you're looking for 4 or below. I don't know how long that would take.
I was gonna say that sounds like a ton of work to me.
Actually, it really isn't, to be honest with you. I mean, the database is there. It's not much for, I don't believe, assessing to run a report. I think the real work would come cross-referencing it with the inspection reports, which I also believe they use the BSNA software, so you could probably run 2 reports on that. Then you would just need to have somebody sift through the reports and line out the ones that didn't jive with one another.
Dennis,
And
if
if
they're
you
doing
wanna-
that, they should also be able to pick up CoStar and merge that in. I know assessing should have access to CoStar.
I would think so.
If you want to scroll up, I think
Okay.
there's a little bit more information in this neighborhood report. Scroll down, sorry, that might intrigue people.
Which page are you wanting us to go to?
Well, I think the page of neighborhood peoples and stats does jive with what we've been talking about already, and that's the median age that we have.
Okay. Where did I go? Here we go. This one.
Yeah, there's a lot in this one that shows education levels, and of course, we expect this to change after the next census, but this is from 2016.
And it's
Now, Steph, is
updated.
this just purchasing or does it include rentals too?
This is all demographic information.
So these
Yep,
aren't
and this is-
necessarily homeowners.
No,
or it's
this is-
everybody.
yeah, this is everybody.
Really stands out to me is the married without children.
So, I mean, that would probably be, I would assume, retired people whose children are not living with them anymore, if they have kids,
Right.
Or young professionals.
right?
But it's 2 to 1.
Yeah, I
And-
mean, nationwide, I mean, that's sort of a trend, from what I've read that, yeah, it's exactly what Jackie said, that not only are there a lot of retired folks, who are aging and, their children are moved out, but there's also, a lot more millennials and younger folks who are married but are waiting longer to have children
Mm-hmm.
or choosing not to.
Well, and it ties into what Steph said at our very first meeting, that she's getting a lot more interest from people that are going to retire in 3 to 5 years. They're looking for a place to buy, to move into for at least 6 months a year, as opposed to maybe what it was 10 or 15 years ago.
And we're even seeing some of our retirees who live here who are less likely to have, you know, the condo in Florida and the camp in Marquette. We're seeing a lot of them that are foregoing the second home and doing more long-term or 3-month rentals somewhere else, but not committing to a certain place and only owning one. if you scroll down further or scroll up, sorry, the this neighborhood report, I'm sorry, the other way.
Okay.
Also does show the occupational categories of the city of Marquette.
Is that income on that last page? The majority of people were under $25,000. Do we think that's skewed by college students? That seems high.
The income per capita of 29,168.
Yeah, the household income brackets. The majority is under, they're making under $25,000. I just don't, I don't know if anybody knows why that is.
That's when the census comes up, depends on where the students get counted at. Often
Right.
students do get thrown into this mix,
Okay.
but you also could have seasonal construction. It
And if you
depends
go to the next page, it fleshes it out just a little bit more on what the income per capita is. And the occupation categories.
The city of Marquette is at 29,000, Marquette County is 25, and the state is at 28. So that really means maybe the skew of the students is not nearly as bad.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark.
And I don't know how retirees reflect that as well.
And this is still 2010 census data?
I believe it's from 2016 data.
it could be more recent too, because it annually updates under the I forget the name of the census program that does that, but they project
American
it.
Community Survey, Dennis, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's it. You're correct, Commissioner. ACS.
And we had talked too about the occupational categories, and this does highlight where our people are working. And I think we've highlighted, we would love to see that manufacturing number higher. And one thing we had talked about is on the next page, how people get to work and the average commute time. And that is just for the city of Marquette. But this, and then the last page, and I'm sure Dennis will share this with everyone, but the last page does say where it gets all the sources and the data.
It's a very comprehensive and really good report. I appreciate you sending that to the committee.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. Thank you, Stephanie. That was really informative. Does anybody have any final questions for Stephanie about this data that she's presented?
And if people want more aspects of data, I can get different parameters to compare and contrast if we need it.
Yeah, thanks, Steph.
Thank you.
I did find, Dennis, the report that you sent out about the rental housing that we were talking about. I thought that was really interesting.
The tiny home kind of thing?
Nope,
that I ran?
the one Who sent it to us? The
Could've
one
been-
you
I
just
think
sent out this morning, the MHC data,
Oh,
Jackie.
that was Jackie.
Yeah, that's actually next.
It was
Our
from
next item
Sharon.
here.
That was, I don't want to take the credit for that. Sharon sent that over.
Yeah, thank you both.
So I gotta say, wait.
Yeah, thank you for that segue there, Stephanie, and thank you to Sharon and Jackie for offering some data from the Housing Commission's perspective as well. Do you guys kind of want to take it away here a little bit, just discuss that a bit?
Yeah, I would say, from my perspective, we're full all the time. I've been on the commission for a year, I think. So I'll let Sharon kind of talk more about the history, because she has that much better than I do.
So basically, Jackie said it all. We are always full. And I think the big thing is, if you look at rentals, you will, anytime you pull up statistics, your statistics on your occupancy rate is going to be skewed based on the time of the month that you pull those statistics. If you pull the statistics on the 15th, they're much different if you pull them on the 1st or 31st, because people move out at the end of the month. We base our statistics on either the 1st or the 31st, depending on which number looks better. We never do the middle of the month. In the middle of the month, we're historically full. Some of the challenges that a lot of rentals are facing is the turnover time. We are very fortunate that we have got some staff that's really good at flipping our apartments. So if we have somebody that moves out on the 1st or the 31st, within 2 weeks, we can usually have that, usually less actually, we can have that apartment ready for somebody to come in. And being that we operate off a waiting list, we always have 2 or 3 people that are ready to go, meaning that we've already done all of the background checks. They are ready to move in at a drop of the hat. And some other rentals, they may be facing the fact that people are calling them and still need to give a 30-day notice. So we are calling ahead of time, working off the rental list, and able to tell Joe that, Joe, we're going to have an opening in 45 days based on certain things. They can give that 30-day notice so that when we call them, they're able to move in right away. One of the things that we are facing now too is our waiting lists are decreasing, and we're not quite sure why that is. But being that we're looking at doing these significant rehabs in both of the units and getting air conditioning, I think that's going to be a major selling point, especially for here at Pine Ridge, where the 9th floor gets really, really hot. So I'm anticipating a change in the next year after the renovation is done, and we're able to show some updated apartments. So full, and continue to look at remaining full with good waiting lists. And as we look at the waiting list, the other thing that's really important, if you look at the waiting list for HCV, which is our scattered site vouchers, those voucher lists, those tend to be from people out of town. We do, in our list for the public housing, we do prioritize that so that people that work or live in Marquette have a priority, so that you have the opportunity to live closer to where you work or stay in the current school district that you're in. So those waiting lists are pretty focused on Marquette County folks, whereas the HCV is a lot of out of town, and frequently places such as Detroit, where they do not have open waiting lists. We've had several clients that have taken a voucher in Marquette, lived in Marquette for a year, and then ported that voucher, which means they take that voucher to Detroit. And they're able to get housing in Detroit, whereas they would never be able to get a voucher in Detroit. So that is a totally different dynamic. And that's what MISHDA faces also. So you will see a lot of MISHDA vouchers that are potentially more transient than some of our apartments here.
I'm just curious, I guess I want to open it up to other folks for questions, but one question I had as I was reading through this data that Dennis sent over from you guys right before the meeting was, if I were to, want to get into Pine Ridge or the Village or whatever, if I were to sign up right now, how long do you think that with your current waiting list and turnover rate that it would take for me to actually get a unit on average?
For a qualified applicant with high preference points, it has taken 2 to 3 months. For a qualified applicant with low preference points, potentially never.
You got the stuff in there from Saturday?
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate
How long is
that.
your waiting list? Or you say it's decreasing. How much has it decreased?
Our waiting list, well, right now is one of the worst times to talk about this because we closed our waiting list. So when we closed our waiting list, we were able to go through it and update it. So it's very, very updated. And there's probably 20 to 30 people on the Pine Ridge waiting list. And I would say about the same for the Lake Superior Village waiting list. The reason we've closed the waiting list is because we are not looking at doing any admissions for probably a year based on the construction.
Okay.
This is
We're just
Dennis.
finding we've had more vacancies. You said your wait list has decreased, but we've actually found kind of the same thing. We don't have a wait list, but we're finding our vacancy factor has definitely increased over the past 2 years. We on average have about 6 vacancies at any given time.
And what do you attribute that to, Mark?
Probably because we're particular. We require a minimum credit score of 630. We do a criminal background check. We reject a lot of people. I bet you apply with us, you probably have a 25% chance of being rejected.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Mark. That's interesting to know.
Can I
A lot of it is criminal background checks and credit scores and people not paying past landlords.
All right, Dennis, go ahead.
I think Sharon might have helped you as a committee identify a potential policy issue, and that I'd like, if I could, maybe learn a little bit more about she had mentioned that, I'm making an assumption here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the vouchers are easier to get here, so we have people that come from outside of the area, qualify for the voucher. We're presuming that they qualify for the voucher just to get the voucher so they can move back to where they came from and get into housing that they normally wouldn't get into in that area.
Exactly.
So how do we stop that?
That's what I was getting at, is that that's like a policy issue.
Almost fraud.
And I don't know that it's a Sharon policy issue.
No, it's not a local
I'm not
thing.
advocating for her to get beat up or anything. I think this is probably a MSHDA state or higher level policy issue.
This is actually a federal issue, and a real interesting, we've talked about this at Federal Housing Commission meetings, and a real interesting example is in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., there are 2 very distinct levels of desirability of places, and it's literally a street. So on this side, they are able to get vouchers, and on the other side of the street, they're not able to get vouchers because they're coming from 2 different entities. So they are having a lot of that where they're applying for DC1 waiting list and moving over to DC2 area because DC2 area is closed. And federally, it's recognized. I can tell you Seattle is a huge problem area because they have $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 rents for a 1-bedroom. And they have people that are trying to port in there, and they don't have enough rentals. And it's a national issue, and the federal government has dealt with it, has discussed it, has considered it, and has said, we want people to have the ability to move into their place of choice.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that background information there, Sharon. And I do agree with you, Dennis. That seems like a pretty serious issue, but unfortunately, perhaps needs some kind of federal legislative solution, maybe. But I guess the other thing that and then I guess we can open it up for any questions anybody has. But I just wanted to note, it does seem like, based on this the waiting list data, the vacancy rates that you all are facing at the Housing Commission, that it does seem that there is a need for more low income housing as well. We talk a lot about the middle income, the missing middle, that kind of thing, but there's clearly also a need for the low income housing as well. But with that, I suppose, anybody have any questions or comments for Sharon or Jackie?
Let me throw something in that I think Mark did a real good job of explaining, and that we as landlords need to understand, and you guys need to appreciate our view as landlords. Without proper screening, it's very difficult to maintain housing that people want to live in. And I can tell you, at one point, the Village had virtually no waiting list, because I'm sure everybody knows the reputation of the Village. So nobody wanted to live there. Well, we worked really hard on getting the Village to a place that people want to live in. So as we open up the middle income, as it were, there are potentially people that live in the Village right now that are going to move out. And then we're going to have vacancies. And as we continue to have vacancies, we are going to need to lower our rental standards. So yes, it's very good to have additional housing for folks, but there's also from the landlord point of view, the higher the demand, the better the quality resident we have, for lack of better words.
Well, that kind of summarizes some of the, choosing my words carefully, issues they've had on the base in their housing.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at some of the base seems to be doing very well. But that goes back to the landlord screening properly.
Absolutely.
And I can also tell you some of the other meetings and places I'm involved with. There is the homeless issue. And there's a real strong support to have housing for people with criminal background, with sex offender lists, with no income, no credit history. And I totally understand that is a very needed segment. And I would like to see how can we address that. And it's difficult because not in my backyard is never going to end. And there are some homeless folks that reality, I don't want living next to me. There are some people making $60,000, $70,000 a year. Reality, I don't want living next to me. So we can't really do the not in my backyard thing. We need to address this. And how can we make this work? How can we come up with some housing for those folks that are ineligible for the middle income, my housing because of criminal background, definitely Mark's housing because of criminal background. So I think that's a big gap, that it's not just the middle income. I think it's the hardest to find housing, find renting, that the city of Marquette needs to look at.
One of my, it might be off topic a little bit, but one of my thoughts for a lot of the homeless in this area is we almost need to encourage, like the Salvation Army. They've got lots of land with their big building. Put a big addition on with a dormitory up above and their coffee shop type situation down below, maybe some handicap type units down below as well, and give them a great place to stay there. Then it could benefit the nonprofits that are in that area of kind of having them come to work. If they're going to stay, they put in an hour of service.
And that is what
phenomenal.
Ruben at the Inn was actually a ways back, was looking at doing that type of a scenario with the Beacon House. and having room rentals. If you can afford it, if you have a Social Security income, you would be paying a room stipend, basically. No commitment, because there are a lot of homeless folks that do not want the commitment of long-term rent. So if you can do it kind of as a nightly rental, with the community area that is for food, which would be like the warming center, and then having another area that would be the monthly rental. So you can transition through the shelter bed. I think it was like the lower level would be shelter bed and the dining, and then 1 day rental, and then on the top would be a long-term rent. So that model works in a lot of areas. Back to Seattle, it does work in Seattle, and I think that the warming center is now looking at doing that with having some stuff upstairs, some rooms upstairs. So I think that's where the homeless community is looking. Unfortunately, the funding isn't there to do it.
I guess my question then, as we're kind of in our last hour of discussion, is what sort of things can we recommend to the city commission that could address any of these issues? Because right now I'm not hearing a whole lot that the city commission could actually handle.
Zoning.
Changing
I think-
zoning to allow more multifamily?
Or even, I'm not sure exactly what happened with Room at the Inn, but to allow that to be that type of rental in different areas, you need to have them be willing to do zoning. And then, of course, there's always the pilot issue.
So from then, I guess I have a question about why aren't more areas zoned for a multi-family use? There's like certain
Actually-
areas where you're not allowed to do it.
This is Dennis. Actually, the zoning ordinance was amended through the Land Development Code, and it does allow quite a bit more multifamily. And they're going through some amendments right now that are actually going to make it a little bit easier to develop it. Certain number of units, the tiers for site plan review the thresholds are actually going up, which is non-standard. We usually go down and it ends up costing a lot of money, but the thresholds are going up to where the cost is going to be basically a zoning compliance permit instead of a whole full-blown deal in front of the planning commission. There were a number of mixed-use districts that were created that allow for multifamily housing. And there are also accessory dwelling units that were added to address this. So it really comes down to a matter of, you have policy things you can do, and then there's also economic conditions and what the market will bear. And I think that has yet to play out.
And I think that kind of segues into our next agenda item. When, regardless of the zoning, where's the raw land to put it?
Well, if I
Yeah, I
wanted,
thi-
like, let's say I have a detached garage, right? And I decide, I want some income from this property. Can I put an apartment above my garage? I mean, what sort of things?
Yes.
I know I'd have to get permitting for that, but is there a lot of zoning restrictions based on where I am in Marquette if I'm able to do that?
No, you can
Those
do
really
that.
decrease.
Yeah, you can do that virtually on any property now.
You also need to realize it's not just the city zoning department that's the factor, it's the cumulative effect of all the permits. I mean, you just take the Rippling River, for example. I have over 180 permits for a campground, individual permits, with numerous different, from DEQ and health department and city and building codes. It's the accumulative effect. I mean, you look at it years ago, you had Pat Kunala building, you had Demarinas building, you had me building, you had Lynn Swadley doing a ton of building. You had a lot more building going on, and honestly, it was easier. And then this big bureaucracy, and you can't blame any one person for it, but this big bureaucracy started coming around, and it almost felt like they only wanted McMansions to be built. And that just kind of pulled everybody back. I think it's coming around, but we need city staff, we need county staff, everybody to want something, and I use the word affordable, not subsidized, but affordable homes. The $150,000 to $200,000 ranch, you know, the apartment that costs $1,000. We need to make sure and take that stigma out, because a lot of city and county officials have a stigma that say something that's affordable is bad.
Are we talking about permitting in a later meeting? Because it's an issue that keeps coming up, and I think it'd be really interesting to see if we can talk about coordinating with other agencies to kind of streamline that process.
Yeah, I believe that was our intention, Jackie. I
Okay.
think that, you know, our, just so folks are aware, and then we can kind of transition into the second new business item, because I think we've had a lot of really great discussion here with this data that's been presented. But the intention for the next couple months here is to next month move into a discussion about zoning, actually, and how that impacts housings and what gets built and things like that, and kind of have a discussion about like missing middle housing as well. What does that really mean? And then the next month, I believe, and Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were planning on having that discussion about you know, potential obstacles or barriers to construction. And
Yes, sir.
I'm sure that would be, thank you. Yeah, and that would be one of the topics we discuss for sure. I think is that bureaucratic process, the permitting process, all of that. Because that's very important. I think Mark described it very well.
And I think Wayne Primo said it the very first meeting.
Yeah.
You know, Evan, before we move on to vacant land, could I get a definition from Dennis of what the mixed use areas are, and what the definition of mixed use really means?
A mixed-use district is a district where you can have a combination of commercial and residential within that district. An example of a mixed-use district that kind of developed itself over time was 3rd Street. You had, at one point in time, you had a mixture of businesses and houses in there. Now that's been codified in a number of other areas to where you can have that, for lack of a better term, kind of on steroids with a more increased density, so that you know, you can actually expect something to be built because the permissions allow for more things on the parcel, thus increasing, you know, making it even, or making even a profit economically on the parcel. The map, as far as where they're located, we'd have to bring up a zoning map of that, and we can talk about it if you prefer when we get to the zoning discussion.
I'm
Can
sure
you
that we will.
share that prior to the next meeting?
I didn't hear that.
I think Stephanie was saying, can we share the zoning map and the definitions of, you know, what the different zoning districts are and things before the next meeting? I think
Yep.
that was our intention.
Yep.
Awesome.
All right, thanks.
Great. So I think we can move on. This is a really good discussion. We will, of course, circle back to all of this later on in this process once we're getting closer to that January date, that January 15th date for our, and we're formulating our initial report to the commission. But moving on to that, to our third new business item, a discussion about the vacant property that's available in the city for housing development. And I think, Dennis, you can maybe kick it off here with the discussion of what city property may be available.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm going to go into my computer and bring up a map of vacant municipal property. And if you can just bear with me for a second, we actually have we keep an inventory of that. Now, this will show us all city and BLP property. What it won't show us would be any private sector property, of course. All right, 2015. And Okay, and I'm gonna, bear with me, I'll share my screen. And hopefully you guys can see it now. And this is our City of Marquette land ownership that I'm going to take you through the legend really quick. We have several different types of property that we track in the City of Marquette that's owned by the City of Marquette. We have active municipal property, and this is from 2015. It's in the process of being updated now, so that's why if you see my cursor over the old municipal service center, which is now a hospital, it's not totally accurate and up to date with things like that. We have inactive municipal property. The definition of inactive municipal property is property that's not being used to advance any type of government function. And just to clarify that a bit, you may see down by my cursor here, McClellan Avenue. You know, we've got this vacant stuff across from the school. Why can't that be used for housing? Well, it's actually actively being used for drainage for the McClellan Avenue area. So there are some of those that may look a little odd, but they're actually being used for something such as drainage, or there may be a conservation easement, a wetland, or something like that. We also have Board of Light and Power property that we have identified on there. And we have a bunch of Heartwood property located in Marquette Township. And then we have the Housing Commission properties, and then city parks. And I think I'll start at the bottom. All of this property here is Heartwood Forest land, the powder blue that's located outside of the city's jurisdiction in various townships, Sands, or Marquette. As we move up, we have property in red, which is identified as the Heartwood properties, which has been placed in conservation easement. We have this wonderful campground down here that Mark was so kind to create economic development. This parcel at the intersection and these parcels to the west are currently being sold to Viridia. Viridia is looking at doing something housing related on this parcel, and then these parcels 9 through 11 are Stephanie mentioned manufacturing. It's kind of light industrial, high-tech type stuff that is looking to go in there. Moving more to the north, this property right here is the old landfill, and it has restrictions on it. Drainage, drainage, drainage. We have parcels that are inactive up here on the north part by the bypass. It would need a little bit of work to get in there. That terrain is pretty rough. It's either going to require somebody's going to have to get CAC involved in that one, because it's pretty interesting terrain up there. And I know we've had some people look at it. We have properties down here. This is where the hotel is going at Founders Landing. And then we have another slice of property along the south side. And then, of course, the Board of Light and Power would probably be deconstructing this plant soon. Moving as we go to the north, this is all hospital stuff now. We have parks. This is a drainage area. This is all conservation easement along McClellan Avenue. We have this area is Lakeview Arena. We have the Cliffs Dow site. That is actually actively being marketed. We were in negotiations with Viridia Group that's still ongoing. We have Park Housing Commission property. Some of this property up here would be available, but it's pretty restricted. I mean, that's the old area known as the swamp. We did donate 5 or 6 lots in here to Habitat for Humanity to build some homes. The same with this area. And then we have a lot of Board of Light and Power. And then along McClellan Avenue, although it's a little terrain restricted, there are these properties here that are zoned multifamily and would be available for the city. So that's it in a nutshell. Then, of course, you have private properties. You know, one that probably would come to mind would be the old hospital complex.
And how much of the Board of Light and Power property is, or what is next to that, that is We Energies?
We Energies would be, this is We Energies all through here, all up here. So BLP is down across the basin from it.
Okay.
I had a quick question there, Dennis. So there's the old, it's like that small little power plant that existed on the corner of like Wright and Sugarloaf, kind of over by the Municipal Service Center. What's the status of that property? Do you know? I assumed it was owned by city or the BLP, but I suppose that's privately owned.
Isn't that NMU's power?
Oh,
That is-
yeah.
Mhm.
That's NMU's power plant.
And that's still operational, right?
It is still operational. They did a biomass project on there. I don't know if the biomass is still a go, but I know they're still using the natural gas through it.
Okay. I was just curious, you know, does anybody have any questions for Dennis? Or, you know, I was hoping that we could also maybe have a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of a brainstorm about other properties that might be available in the city, or, you know, ways in which city property could be used to generate some more kind of that affordable or missing middle, that workforce housing that we've discussed in the past.
I think it was last week I had a discussion about the We Energies. And it's interesting how much of that is not really developable, of the, I think, 60 some acres that they own. And I just don't think we have a ton of raw land. And as
Yeah.
it is, we have so many people, you do anything with anything we have, and people get upset. I think people don't understand how governments are run.
Does the city have any sort of wish list, I guess, as far as those inactive properties and what you would want to see done on them?
From my perspective as community development director, we open to any and all ideas for it. You know, we have a future land use plan for the community, and you know, some of those properties, like the ones on Wright Street, have been identified for potential residential development. The Cliffsdale site has been identified as a mixed use opportunity, and so on. So, you know, we've gone through somewhat of an exercise to kind of land classify them based upon their location and you know, availability of utilities and access to the transportation network and things like that. So
is Mahaney going through with this project on the Dow property?
He's still in negotiations with the city manager.
Okay.
But to answer your question, Jackie, we have a general idea. And that idea is pretty much limited to kind of a wide range of uses rather than drilling it down to something specific, because you could, that may allow you to lose an opportunity if you're a little bit too specific on it.
And I think one thing that the city has done is opening up zoning restrictions so that you can have a convenience store on the bottom and apartment on top again, and re-allowing some of that type of development, which could give us some, I guess, vertical space.
Yep, you're correct.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, is that, a lot of this is going to come down to discussions about zoning and, how do we gradually allow more, development and redevelopment of properties to expand the supply of affordable and workforce housing in the city, because we do have a shortage of open land. One thing I did note when I was kind of doing a little bit of research and going around on Google Earth and the city zoning map is there's a lot of, I think that we may want to at some point in the future form partnerships with Northern as well, because NMU owns quite a bit of vacant property that at first glance at least seems like it's in a pretty decent walkable area near campus, maybe in some ideal locations for some student oriented housing or just housing for anybody in general. And so I think looking at some of that, particularly was sort of noting that there's some property on the east side of Presque Isle Avenue between Norwood and Wright Street, or there's some property, there's a big block, but kind of between campus and Woodland Apartments, another one that's to the southeast of Woodland Apartments, and it's all just kind of vacant and owned by the university. So maybe there's some opportunities for some partnerships there moving forward.
And I do believe that the hospital will be selling some of the vacant lots that they own. That
They're
should be
currently up
coming
for sale.
Yeah,
What?
there's some for sale already, I think.
They've
Yeah,
got
they're
them
Selling
up.
some already, yeah.
Yep. So that was another opportunity I wanted us to discuss, as well as, the old hospital site, and not just the site of the old hospital itself, because there's tremendous demolition costs associated with that. You need a very well capitalized developer or multiple developers with significant capital to do anything with that property. Hopefully it happens soon, but there are of course multiple smaller, single lots that the DLP owns that are located near that property, which, as you all noted, are for sale right now. And I think those are great opportunities for kind of infill development.
I just wanted to throw one more thing out there. Stephanie, you talked about going up high, and going up high is a good thing, but it gets significantly more expensive to go higher than 2 stories. You're looking at fire suppression system, you're bringing in bigger water mains, you're paying monthly fees on those water mains, even though you're not using them. You have multiple stairways, interior hallways, which is creating more utility usage, more cleaning. So it's not as easy as people think to just go up higher. Like a townhome where you go 2 stories, you have a front and a back entryway, there's no fire suppression, there's no interior cleaning, there's no fire monitoring, So there's a lot more than just going up. When you go up, you're adding your costs up significantly.
I agree completely, Mark. I guess what I was saying about going up was more
It's good
commercial
use.
on the bottom, rental on top, or apartment on top, condo on
Yep.
top.
But then even then, if you do the mixed use, that's going to trigger fire suppression, which most of these lots only have a 1-inch water line going into, which is then going to require a 4-inch or greater water main going in there. So those are things like the city could actually do that. If somebody's going to develop a small facility that they need to put a fire suppression line in, maybe they don't charge as much to get that in there, because you're not actively using that line for firefighting or for domestic water. You know, you only need your 1-inch line for that. You know, even on a 40 unit building only needs a 2-inch water line, but you have to have a 6 or an 8 for the fire suppression. So maybe that's an area where the city could help out by making it easier for people to install those and lowering that. I look at the monthly cost more than just construction cost.
Well, and there's also the garaging issues. The higher you go up, the more, let's say everybody's got one car, we're gonna have to have either underground parking or first floor will be parking or something along those lines. So, you know, there's little extra wrinkles there too.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point you make there, Mark, about the added costs of going up above 2 stories. I've been doing some research. That's something I discovered. I had no idea was the case. I like some of the ideas you're talking about there, but I think that also underscores how if there's going to be new construction, a lot of it is going to have to be that kind of more like middle density level, at least when you're talking about kind of smaller developers. The other thing that I was really curious about it as I was looking at the zoning map and maps of the city, maybe folks can shed some light on this, is there is that big empty lot that's like directly west of Snowberry Heights on Spring Street, like between Spring and Washington. Do people know, does anybody know what the situation is with that?
Snowberry
It's held by a private development company.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Is it the same folks that own Snowberry?
No.
Yes, it is. That area that they kind of look like they put a rink on that?
Yeah.
I've tried to get that multiple times.
Oh, okay. Interesting, because that seemed like a really obvious, you know, it's super walkable, very large. You could fit it, you could get a good number of units on there. I don't know what the utility situation would be like, but I mean, it's right next to an existing neighborhood in our downtown district. That, like, when you look at a map of the city of Marquette and you're looking at, you know, potentially developable property, that is like really sticks out like a sore thumb.
Absolutely.
And Mark, I really enjoy your point about the higher you go, the more obstacles to building. I think that's a really good point, and I'm trying to figure out, when we discussed maybe in the second meeting a little bit about not having property that's connected to the lakefront access, I think that's where a lot of the premium real estate and no availability right now for building such projects of maybe multifamily to 4 to 12 units. I think that's part of the key equation, is where do we find incentives for developers to be able to take on these projects without, you know, like you bring up the fire suppression issue. That shouldn't be a sticking point to building new housing that is in that range that we're talking about. So that's a really good point. I think we kind of are hitting the right points by bringing up those topics, and that's for later discussion for development and construction costs as well.
You know that
Cost 25 per unit.
what was that, Mark?
When you add in, when you look at the size of the main, digging into the street, tap fees and all that, each unit for fire suppression probably costs 25 to 35,000.
And how much of that is from fees from government agencies as opposed to just straight construction costs?
I don't know, that would be kind of everything. That's from tapping into your water main, repairing the street that you might have to do, you know, and some of that can vary quite a bit.
And in terms of maybe Mark, a question for you would be, let's assume you have a 12-unit construction here locally where the rink is. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
What are we looking at in terms of, for a developer to make that work at the right price point and vary the number of units and also the size? What would be the smallest unit potentially you could get away with without, you know, getting into margin and all that? Just for example, 750, 900, 1200. What are we looking at in terms of an actual apartment size?
Square footage size?
Square footage, excuse me. Mm-hmm.
So what you want to really look at is, you know, you got to remember, every apartment you build, you're going to have at least one bathroom, you're going to have at least one kitchen, right? Those are your most expensive parts of a building. So to do a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, you still have this kitchen, and you still have this bathroom, and you still got a little bit of a living room. So to add another bedroom on is not that expensive. So it's more economical to build 2 bedrooms and even 3 bedrooms than it is to do a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, but the demand is more for the 1-bedrooms. So your cost per square foot goes up dramatically on your 1-bedrooms. Because you still have, you still have to bring in your water main, you still have to bring in all of your infrastructure, you still have a furnace, you still have a hot water heater for that unit. So to go from 1 to 2 bedroom, that's why you see a lot of people build 2 bedrooms. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, really good points to consider in terms of finding a developer that would be willing to look at a project that requires a lot of different size units.
And I really think all we can do from a city perspective is incentivize and maybe eliminate or streamline as much as the process as possible and incentivize the best way we can.
One of the big things that I would love to see as a developer for the city is the site plan review needs to be changed. And you need to go in there with a concept, then get different input from people on the planning commission, and virtually almost have a developable envelope that you can kind of do what you want on, and then Dennis and Andrea could sit down there and say, okay, well, your fixed setbacks are this, but, you go and you make a minor change, you potentially have to go all the way back through site plan review again. And if we could make it a little bit easier, a little bit less frustrating, you might get more people that would come in here and do stuff.
Mark, in your communications with other developers, is there a place that is doing development, a municipality that's doing development in a streamlined, developer-friendly way that we could look at their model?
Nothing that I would have great confidence on. I mean, I'm looking at doing some stuff towards Bellingham, Washington. They're very welcoming, and they're a very liberal community, a lot like this. There's even some spots in California that we're doing some very small stuff. The smaller projects do seem easier than doing, say, 20, 30 or greater units. I think that's where it gets tough. So I don't have a great answer. Is everybody still there?
Yeah, we're still here. Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. Does anybody else have any other, questions or ideas or, thoughts that had occurred to them about potential properties? Kind of wonder, hey, well, what about this one?
The one other one to throw in for smaller, but when we talked before about 0 lot lines and some different stuff like that in the type of thing we develop, there is that relatively small Coco's property and the land they have there as well. Lake Shore.
Yeah, that's another one that sticks out is that west side of Lake Shore, kind of south of Nestle Down, but north of Crescent Street. Also, there's like that property behind Nestle Down that I know like some folks had different plans and ideas for in the past. So,
but what's interesting is there were developer plans, maybe, I'm not sure how far it went, in the area next to Nestle Down, and that was and it was rental, I believe, not condo, and it was so poorly received.
Yeah, they got ran out of town. You can say it.
I think you talk about building near the lake shore, not even on that side of the street, but people don't like that idea ever.
Yeah, I think if you were going to do that successfully, it would have to be a more medium scale kind of thing. And I think that there would have to be certain guarantees made ahead of time, like, well, this is going to benefit the community because X number of units are going to be at X price point. And, they would have to do I think what happened with that project is they released these giant, 4 or 5 story, concepts, and everybody freaked out. And there were like,
But
over
the problem is, it's very hard to make 12 units make sense.
You got to have that economy of scale. You got to go big.
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid point. I just think that when we're talking specifically about property near the lakeshore, you're always going to run into that public opinion issue.
And then you look at the properties that are going in Founder's Landing, and while they do fit some of the things we've been talking about, I don't think they really fit the mid affordability range. And so it's more of the same.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stephanie. And I think initially, there was kind of some talk about, oh, well, this is going to be more with that workforce housing, and it didn't for whatever reason, maybe, just plans changed, but didn't turn out like that.
It's just really hard to build something that affordable for the reasons Wayne and Mark have completely highlighted. And I can't wait to get into those more.
Absolutely.
Well,
Well,
one of the things, if I could just interject real quickly, that, the whole purpose of me sending that tiny house listing was so people could get an idea of, that's pretty damn expensive. At least when I looked at it, I thought
I was
it
surprised. Yeah, I thought that was pretty expensive when you sent that over.
And change, and then you don't even have the cost to hook it up to utilities and stuff. And I mean, by the time you do that, you're probably looking at an $80,000 set right there. I thought that was insane.
It's essentially a mobile home, but smaller. It's just, it was surprising.
I talked to the township people about that this morning because they've done some initial work on that tiny house stuff, and they sent me copies of their definitions and their permitted districts and detailed use regulations, and I can make that available if you want. So if we want to look at that seriously, we don't have to reinvent the whole thing.
that would be great, Bob, if you can send that along. I know there's a couple other, I think like Scandia Township is looking into updating their zoning code to allow for tiny homes. So maybe that's another thing that we should look at in terms of recommendations.
Yeah, I'll send that to Dennis.
If you're looking to increase housing, you should not look at tiny homes. Look at, still got 4 walls, you still got your kitchen, but you're taking up land where you could put many units.
It's also not necessarily going to be family housing. I mean, I'm not sure who exactly we're talking about when we talk about the need for housing, but I mean, it's one or two people tops are living in those. You're not going to have a family of 4 in a tiny house.
Yeah.
Not unless you really like each other.
Yep. Well, with that, I don't know if anybody has any final we've got like 10 minutes left here. If anybody has any final questions or thoughts about anything that we discussed today, including this discussion about potential land for development.
I have a quick question. Is there any talk about what is happening with the Shopko area and Office Max? Is that?
Those properties are held by private entities. I have been in contact with the Shopko landowner, for lack of a better term. It's kind of a company that bankrupts properties and then holds them in abeyance until it can find a buyer for them. And I've sent a couple interested parties their way, but nothing has come to fruition. And maybe Stephanie knows more than I do.
The last time I checked on both of them, they had accepted offers, but I don't know if those have gone through.
It's good news.
Okay, great. Well, anyway, that's a really good point, Sharon. That's a good thing to note.
My other thought is, back to talking about the price point. And I've done a lot of Airbnbs throughout the country. And what I'm seeing a lot of is those apartment buildings that are doing 25, 75, 20 or 50, 50 Airbnb versus rentals. And if you can get $200 a night for an Airbnb, that can lower the cost of those rentals. So that is one opportunity to be able to do a more affordable rental, is to mix it with the Airbnb, but then the city has to agree to have Airbnbs.
But then you're taking that unit out of the local pool of housing.
Correct. But you're potentially adding housing, because where it would not otherwise be affordable, you're skewing that cost with the Airbnb cost.
That's a really good point, Sharon, and also, you know, Mark, good point as well. I mean, there's always going to be that tension, I think, with the Airbnbs of, okay, taking things out of the long-term rental market versus, you know, like you said, Sharon, some possibilities for that making a homeowner, you know, able to afford their home, or better able to afford their home, or like you said, perhaps subsidizing long-term rental units in the same complex. So, I mean, definitely a discussion that we need to have at some point. I think we should probably have a discussion specifically about short-term rentals at some point.
Because I'm thinking construction,
And I
new
do want
construction.
to highlight, I do want to highlight too that there is a perception that a lot of the condos are short-term rentals, and that is, there's no condo unit in Marquette over 4 units that allow short-term rentals. So it's not happening in condos, but I think a lot of people think that it is. Dennis, I know this is going off topic, but do you know, when we do talk about short-term rentals, do you know how applications have been filed without having the fire inspection?
I don't believe you can advertise or have one without the fire inspection.
No, you can't. But what we found is that there are people who have gotten applied for and gotten the Airbnb, but have no desire to ever do Airbnb, so they never went forward with the fire inspection, and they don't have an Airbnb. They're just holding the license.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't answer that for you. That entire process is managed by the fire department. That's interesting.
So when we do talk about short-term rentals, we'll get that info. And maybe we'll have.
So you think they're land squatting? You know,
oh, I know
in case
they
they
are.
have one, or they just don't want it in their neighborhood, so that counts against the cap.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sure a lot of people do that because they don't want them in their neighborhoods. Because I looked at doing it, to be honest.
Yeah, I've heard about that issue as well.
Isn't it there's a pretty small cap anyway, right, on Airbnbs for the city?
250.
250? Okay.
Think about if we didn't have those 250 Airbnbs, how much more housing we'd have in Marquette.
And how much less tourism?
No, because the hotels would pick it up.
It's a different traveler. And
Yeah.
I say that my best friend's Randy Larson, so we have this discussion all the time. But I have an Airbnb that's a homestay in my house, so I meet every single person, and it's a different traveler.
Yeah, and I think that, sorry, my campers have been having some issues today, but I do think that, you know, there are valid points on both sides. I think that there's definitely a major distinction in my mind between, like, Stephanie, what you're describing of just having somebody having an Airbnb out of their home versus, you know, taking long-term rental units off the market because you can make more money renting them as Airbnbs. But you know, I think that that's certainly a discussion we need to have in the future.
And one thing that did happen with quarantine is some of the people that were much more marginal with a long-term Airbnb have put them on the market or put them into long-term, because 3 months of no rental in a short-term Airbnb and their numbers don't work. So it kind of, it did throw a few more into both the market and into long-term rentals.
Great. We got about 5 minutes left here. Does anybody else have any final, questions, comments, maybe some notes for things that we'd like to discuss in the future?
I just wanted to mention that I really like Mark's suggestion about talking to the Salvation Army about doing something for the homeless people around their building over there. That's a good location for that, and seems like that would fit in with the Salvation Army's missions. So I think we ought to not forget about that as a recommendation.
Thanks for that, Bob. I think that's a really good point. And actually, early next month, I think before our next meeting, I'm going to be in my capacity as a city commissioner heading over to as a guest at a Room at the Inn meeting. So maybe, those folks are really tuned in with the needs of the homeless community. And so I can try and ask what specific, city, from a policy standpoint, what specifically the city could do, and perhaps come back with that information at a future meeting. I do think it might make sense for us to have a discussion about homelessness and like low income housing at some point in the future.
Good.
And one last thing I'd like to mention for the team and Evan, I brought this idea up maybe a month ago. I still would be game for doing a self-guided walking tour, maybe identifying a few current construction types that are desirable. And that would, I think, spark some creativity to try to make some recommendations, something that's walkable, something that's in town, not necessarily at the lakefront, but I wanted to just go ahead and do that before it gets really cold outside. So that could kind of be a nice, putting in some actual pictures or something on a mini presentation.
That would be awesome, Antonio, if you want to do that. And I was thinking about doing something similar as well, because I think it would be especially fruitful for our next couple meetings where we'll be discussing zoning, missing middle housing, and obstacles to new construction. I think that we kind of need to have a better idea of what exactly we're looking for.
Maybe the two of you could go out in a car with a camera.
Let's do it. Great. Well, unless there are any final comments or questions, I think that, does anybody have anything? All right. Not hearing or seeing anything. So in that case, we're going to be adjourned here at 11:58 a.m. Dennis, what's the date of our next meeting again?
1 moment, please. Let me shift between many things here. It will be October 6th, right? No, I'm sorry, 13th.
Great. And so, we'll look forward to that next meeting. And I think that, as we noted before, just a couple quick notes. We will, I'm sure, send out some information about city with the zoning map and the zoning code, the land development code, I should say. I think there's a couple of reports and studies I've seen lately that are kind of interesting that we might send along to folks. And also, I'm going to try and make use of a connection I have to see if we can get somebody who worked a lot on this issue down in the Grand Rapids area to see if he can come talk to us. So with that.
And Mark,
Yeah.
if someone could give us a list of just even all the permits that are required.
Oh, that can take forever, but I can work on it.
That'd be great.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. It's 12 p.m., so I'm going to be respectful of folks' time, but thank you all for taking the time to be on the call today, and we'll look forward to our meeting on October 13th.
Thank you
Sounds
all.
good. Thanks.
Good.
Thanks.